Okay, today's tutorial is going to be a quick tutorial on projection painting right here using MudBox, as well as just normal painting here. So this model that I have is a model that I created in ZBrush, and I brought it up to a really high subdivision. I'm going to press W and you can see that the subdivision's all the way up here. Back in Maya right now, I have this imported in with a much lower subdivision level than this, so kind of a base mesh, and then I'm using normal maps in Maya to get all the sculpting detail in there. But within ZBrush, I don't personally, at least in my own workflow, enjoy doing color in ZBrush, and I like to kind of take the model out of ZBrush into my MudBox for this. So again, in ZBrush, I brought it up to pretty much as high as subdivision level, exported it as an OBJ, and then imported that OBJ into MudBox just by going to File and Import. So importing this high-res OBJ. And now I'm using MudBox to paint the color on top of this. And so when you're painting in MudBox, we have MudBox here, we have the sculpt tools right here, the paint tools right here. When you're doing painting in MudBox, we have the sculpt tab here, and then the paint tab right there. So we're going to stay in the paint tab. Diffuse is the name for in Maya's workflow for color maps. So I'm working in color maps, and I like to work in layers here in MudBox because it allows me to kind of function much the way I would in Photoshop. It works much that way. So for instance, I have a paint layer here, and I just painted it in green using the paintbrush right here, just painting it in green all the way around, just filling the whole character here just to give myself a baseline. And just like Photoshop, I have the opacity slider, which is right here, so I can fade each layer in and out. And so I like to divide it into, big layers here as I work here. And the way that you get this started here, I started this tutorial once I already started because I realized it would be good to make a tutorial out of this, is you create a new paint layer by pressing this button right here, and it'll give you this, and you just kind of name it, choose, for this instance I'm doing 4096 by 4096. I should maybe even consider going up to 8K for this, but I'm gonna do 4K and cross my fingers here. And I'm gonna do TIFF 16-bit floating point, and then diffuse, remember, is the name for the color map, and you just press OK, and then a new layer gets created right here. And you can delete these layers at any time by just making sure it's selected blue right there and just pressing the trash can, and it'll delete it out for you. And so here what I've done is I kind of started out and I created a projection painting where I kind of painted all around the character, creating this uniform texture here just to get you up to speed of where I am. And then I have a layer here where I'm trying to, there's a lot of work to go, but I'm painting in kind of reptilian textures on this character here, and I'm trying to get a variety of textures going here and layer them together to make it so the character's not like the same texture uniformly all the way around the model, because that can get a little stale and unrealistic. Because if you look at any kind of creature out in the wild, their skin around their eyes is going to be different than their nose, than their forehead, and so kind of getting a variety of textures is important here. And so for that, I needed to find a variety of images I can use as my stencil. So before I talk about finding a variety of images, I'm going to show the basic technique we're going to use here, which is pretty straightforward. So I'm working on this layer right here, which we can see I'm kind of adding that kind of crocodile style texture. And what you're going to want to do is you're going to go to the paint tools, the projection tool. And if I double click on the projection tool, you can see my properties window changes here. So I have the size of the brush, the strength of the brush. I pretty much always want it at 100. I have symmetry turned on. The color is white, and that is fine because I'm going to choose a stencil down here to have as my color. Remember, if you hold down spacebar, this allows you to change, this button right here allows you to change your brush size. This is the strength, which again I'm not going to mess with for this. I just want it right at 100% right there. But with a projection brush, I need to choose a stencil to add with it here. So it comes with these stencils that are that come loaded in MudBox automatically right here. And you can reposition these by holding S. And you see there's these shortcuts right here. So Q hides the stencil, so it brings it off and on again. I can still press Option and rotate my camera around and reposition this way, zoom in and out. And additionally, with the stencil, I can hold S, and if I right click, I can make it the stencil smaller or larger here. If I do the middle mouse button, it'll pan it around, and that gives some nice options here. And so when you're doing the projection brush, it's really straightforward. Just if you click on the projection brush, the attribute editor gives you these controls, which is mainly, do you want size, the size of your brush to change? So I have a medium-sized brush there. I can drag this to be larger and end up with a huge brush. It's so big right now it's covering the whole model. Again, I like to hold spacebar, click on this button right here, and change the brush size that way. And then you can turn on symmetry. And additionally, if you click on the stencil, you see the attribute editor changes here as well, or sorry, the property editor changes over here. And so you can change a few things right here. There's the visibility slider. If I drag it down, it still paints the same, but you can just see more of your model. Alternatively, I could drag it all the way up where it you can't really see the model underneath it. Remember, you can press Q to hide your stencil at any point right there. I'll bring that back down. Oh, and edit undo. Sometimes you have to just manually do it up here, which is annoying. I like to keep the visibility pretty low on this so that I can continue to see the model as I work here. And these are some controls that let you just quickly kind of change the positioning if you want to change the positioning of your stencil. Another important thing here is with the stencil, I'll turn the visibility back up, is you can hold R and then just do a normal click, and you can rotate the position of the stencil. This little menu will show up in the top left, but you can basically ignore it and just let it go there. Additionally, you can click to use tiles. If you have a tileable texture, which this might be, let's test it out. Yep, this is a tileable, or maybe not. Oh no, that's not a tileable texture. If you have a tileable texture, it makes it so your stencil isn't just that big, it covers the whole model. Oops. And so now, hypothetically, what am I missing here? Oh. So now, hypothetically, I can paint all over the model, right, and get that stencil added on there, as opposed to being limited to a certain area. But that only really works if you have a tileable texture here. So I'll press Edit Undo. Click on my stencil again, because remember this properties menu, you only get it by clicking on the stencil itself. I'm going to not use tiles. And so how do you bring in your own images here? You can see I have a few loaded in already down here. And you click on this arrow, and then you go to Add Stencil, and you just load in a stencil here. There's certain specs that it needs to be here. So if you notice, if you look at my images here, this one PNG and this one JPEG are the same image, but you can see the JPEG's grayed out. I had to fix it in Photoshop. I found that image online, and I think it was the wrong DPI. So basically, if you have a JPEG should work, but if it's grayed out for you, you might want to just open up your image in Photoshop and make sure that it's a 16-bit image and that the resolution is anywhere between 72 and 300 DPI. And I'll kind of show that a little bit more here in just a moment. And so you can just add your own stencils in by clicking right there. And so these are some of the stencils that I've added in already. Let me click on this one. And so you can kind of choose your own custom images here, and to make sure that that's not grayed out again. And it makes it so you can paint in your own images right there. So one thing you'll see here is on my picture, which obviously still needs a lot of work, but you can see here that I'm using all these stencils, and these are all from different animals that I've picked these from. I had to kind of go online and let me turn the visibility back up so we can see these again. So here are the images that I was able to find, but you can see that there's kind of a uniformity to their color right here. You see how they all kind of almost look like they belong to the same animal? Well, in reality, these images, some of them were green, some were blue, And there's a Photoshop trick that I use to kind of unify my color palette before even bringing them in here. There's tools that you can use in MudBox to unify your color, the color of your images here, with like the hue and hue shift brushes and things like that. But I think it's easier, especially if you have a very disparate collection of images, to just do the step ahead in Photoshop with this easy step I'm about to show here. So opening up Photoshop, when I have a few images loaded up, and this is the first image that I started to use, and I realized I liked the color of it and I wanted to kind of continue to use it more. But my other images were kind of like green, you know, this is a good example of what another one of my images looked like. And so if I start using the projection brush with this, and then I do this, the colors are going to be so different that it's going to look like very strange and very patchwork. And so there's a really easy trick you can do to fix this in Photoshop. It's really only one step here. So the image that I like is called 2 PNG. And so I want to take the texture snake and change the color so it fits that. You could do it like by using like the hue saturation controls and things like that down here and try to do it manually. But there's an easier way to do it here, which is what I'm going to show. So if you select the green image that you want to turn brown, you can go to Image Adjustments, and go down to Match Color right there. So Image Adjustments, Match Color, and you click on that. And all you really need to do is, what this is going to do is it's going to shift this color to match the color palette of that other one. And all I need to do is go down to Source, find the image that I want to match it to. You can see here it pretty much already does it for me. I can change some controls, like get the luminosity a little bit down. The color intensity I can kind of bring up or down, which is going to be a little hard to see with this particular image. But you can do some fine controls here. And let me just cancel that and start over on that. So Image Adjustments, Match Color, Source, I'm going to change it to that image right there. And I'm just going to take the luminance down a notch and say OK there. So you can see already, if I press Edit Undo, I took my image from that to that. And if I bring them back and forth, that's not quite a total match, but it's very close at this point. And so if I want to continue to adjust this, if you're familiar with Photoshop, you can do adjustment layers, or you can go to Image Adjustments. This is the exact same thing. And kind of change some of your levels controls, things like that. Levels controls is just dark, mids, lights, and you can shift it. So if I want more mids to be bright, my mids to be brighter, I just take this middle slider and drag it in a little bit. If I wanted to have like a ton of contrast for some reason, I can just drag it like that. This is a really good control to kind of get used to here. So I'll just press OK there. Edit Undo, so that's where it was initially. This is where it is now. And you can just really start to match your textures that way. So you can collect a bunch of different textures. And this is true whether you're doing a human, reptile, if you're doing tree bark. This technique is really helpful either way. And so what I need to do now is I just need to save it. So I'll go to File, Save As. And I'm going to save it as a PNG. Oh, but before I save it as a PNG, I need to go, I need to check the specs on this because I got this online and some of these have some weird resolutions. So to check that, you just, in Photoshop, go to Image Size right here. And this is looking good. So we got 300 dpi, that's good. 1000 by 750, it's kind of small, but that'll work. So that's okay, I'll close it out. And I'll just go to File, Save As. I like to save these as PNGs. And I'll just call this Texture Snake, version 2, because I corrected it, and press Save. Okay, and so that's ready to go now. So if I open up MudBox again, I can take an image that initially looked kind of, you know, borderline greenish here, and switched it to match the rest of the color palette here. So I can kind of bring it in and it'll match the rest of this texture here. One thing I like to do here as well is I have these different layers here, so I'll hide this, bring on this other layer, so I have this kind of uniform green texture here. And again, I like to treat this MudBox document almost like a Photoshop file, where I have this at 45% opacity, and I can overlay it on top of this other layer. You can kind of start adding layer on top of layer here and getting like a ton of control over the skin type and the textures of your character or object here. Additionally, if you want to do some airbrushing, I recommend that as well. So if I were to do some airbrushing, I would just click this button here to make a new layer. I'll call it Airbrush. And if you're doing like a stylized character, you're probably going to want to skip the projection painting and just go straight to Airbrush for that. Notice here I have about 4 layers. I would try to keep it around 4 layers. It depends on how powerful your computer is, but this might start to lag if you start to kind of get too crazy with the amount of layers we have here. But with Airbrush is a lot like Paintbrush. So with the Paintbrush, I just double click it, and I'm going to click like a dark green right here. And the normal brush, if I paint, looks like that. You know, very much what you would probably expect. And then the airbrush, the only difference between it, and I'm just gonna, I could do the a hex code thing, but I'm just gonna manually find the color, is it's a little softer. You know, so if you're working with realistic characters and things like that, press edit undo, the airbrush is a really helpful tool here. And I like to kind of keep it on its own layer here so that I can paint it, and if I go too heavy with it, if I'm too extreme with it, I can just you know, hide the layer, start again, or I can take the opacity slider and just drag it down to kind of get something more subtle. Just trying to work non-destructively and getting as much control as you can on your character here is ideal. Additionally, so if you want to make, just kind of going through some more of these controls here with MudBox, you can really get far with everything that I've just shown here so far. But additionally, we have like the blur tool, the dodge, and the burn tool. Contrast, if you're familiar with Photoshop, all of these should be really familiar. Dodge brightens the area of that you're painting on right there. You can see right there, I just brightened that area right there. It ups the exposure. I'll press edit undo. Burn does the exact opposite, where it darkens an area. So if you wanted, if you don't like to use the airbrush, you could use this to darken certain areas of your mesh. Sometimes it's good to do a combo. Just remember you're kind of working destructively, working this way a little bit. And then contrast will just kind of boost the contrast within the image, which will be a little more subtle in this instance because there's already a ton of contrast there. So when it comes time to export your final image, the way that I like to do it here is, let's just pretend that this is done. What you can do is, when you're exporting normal maps in MudBox, you're usually going up to UVs and maps and doing like an extraction down here with a new operation. But so it's a little more complicated there, but for a color map it's a lot easier. So for a color map, all I do is I just click on my diffuse group right here, and so I right click, and then I just go export channel merged. You could also export it to a PSD if you wanted to, so that's an option for you, but I just like to work in here and keep it as a flat image. So export channel merged. So again, I just diffuse, right click, go down here, export channel merged. We'll get this menu, and I'll call this Monster Color version 2, and you can save it as a PNG 8-bit, that's totally fine. For this instance, I'm going to go down to a TIFF 16-bit floating point because I'm kind of going for like an ultra real thing, and I want to make sure I kind of spare no expense, if you know what I mean. So I'll press save. It'll take a second to think about it. And here, if I go down and go under my source images, grayed out for some reason. Okay, sorry about that. So if I go into my project window, keep in mind that I have a project window right here that I'm using for this, and really important to kind of maintain that, just so you can kind of keep everything in one folder here. There's a bunch of reasons for that. One is that Maya is very unstable without it, but another reason is if you want to back up your work, you can just like take this folder, drag it onto an external hard drive, and you got it saved. You know, so there's a bunch of reasons for it. But you can see here that I have that that map is exported out of MudBox. Obviously, hopefully it's clear, I UV'd the model before bringing it in here. So make sure that your model is UV before you start this whole process. And so all I need to do now is just attach this to the hypershade in Maya, and this color map will be added onto my model.